Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a fantastic collection of source material you sent over this time.
Yeah, it's quite a mix.
It really is lecture notes on AI regulation, these real-world cases of AI in action, and the whole backstory of the EU AI Act.
Right.
So the mission today for everyone listening is basically to unpack all of that. We want to figure out what this big EU law actually means, whether you're, building AI products, just using them, or maybe just curious about where this is all headed.
Exactly. And the sources give us a great way in. We can look at AI ethics not just as abstract ideas, but through the very practical lens of this new legislation.
Moving from principles to actual practice.
Precisely. Hopefully by the end, everyone will have a much better sense of what's allowed, what's not, and why it's such a big deal.
Okay, let's jump in then. One thing that really stood out from the materials were these examples that make you pause and go, hang on, can they actually do that?
Oh, absolutely. The lecture notes brought up some really potent scenarios, things that show exactly why we're even talking about regulation.
Like what specifically?
Well, think about facial recognition being rolled out in public areas without a super clear reason,
Right.
or AI systems ranking job candidates based on their tone of voice. How subjective is that?
Incredibly.
And even things like mental health apps that are constantly tracking your mood.
That feels like sensitive territory.
It is, and it's precisely these kinds of applications, these potential harms, that the EU AI Act is trying to get its arms around.
So what were the big triggers? What real-world events really pushed this forward?
Well, there were definitely a few key moments. Cambridge Analytica back in 2018 was a huge one.
Yes, the Facebook data scandal.
Exactly. It really starkly showed how algorithms could be used to, well, manipulate public opinion, influence elections even.
How many users were affected again? It was massive, wasn't it?
Over 87 million Facebook users. Their data was harvested without proper consent and used for targeted political ads. It was a real wake-up call about, algorithmic influence on democracy itself.
It really drove home how powerful and potentially dangerous this tech could be in shaping what people see and believe. Then, switching gears to employment, you had companies like HireVue popping up around 2019 using AI to screen job applicants.
Yes, and that caused quite a stir. They were using these sort of secret algorithms, often with facial recognition, to analyze video interviews.
What kind of data were they claiming to analyze?
Well, this is where it gets concerning. They talked about tens of thousands of data points, intonation, inflection, word choice, even subtle facial movements meant to represent emotions,
Wow.
all supposedly to predict employability. But the lack of transparency was a major issue. How do you prepare? What are they actually judging you on?
And the potential for bias seems huge.
Exactly. Are these systems just encoding existing biases? It felt like a black box making really important decisions about people's career.
Which leads us nicely to bias, actually. The MIT gender shades study around 2018-2019 was pivotal there, wasn't it?
Hugely significant. Joy Buolamwini and Dr. Tunick Gebru's work, it really laid bare the inaccuracies in commercial facial recognition systems.
Especially for certain groups, right?
That's the key finding. The error rates for identifying the gender of darker-skinned women were shockingly high, up to nearly 35% in some systems,
Compared to.
compared to less than 1% error for lighter-skinned men.
That's a staggering difference.
It really is, and it pointed directly to bias training data. The systems were literally trained on data sets that didn't adequately represent everyone
So the technology itself was reflecting societal imbalances.
and amplifying them. It forced a hard look at who these systems were actually built for and tested on. Imagine that inaccuracy in, say, law enforcement tech.
The consequences could be devastating. Okay, another area that raised flags was AI therapy bots, like Replica.
Right, and others like Woebot. The idea of accessible mental health support is appealing, of course.
Yep.
But the ethical lines got very blurry, very fast. Replica, for instance, was marketed almost as a friend, a companion, sometimes even a romantic partner.
And people shared incredibly personal stuff with it.
They did. Millions of users.
Yeah.
But there was little to no clinical oversight, no clear guardrails.
And then things got weird, didn't they, with Replica?
Yeah, reports surfaced in 2022, 2023 about inappropriate, sometimes sexually explicit interactions generated by the AI. It even led to a temporary ban in Italy.
Wow.
It really highlighted the risks, especially for vulnerable people seeking connection or support. Even with bots like Woebot, focused on CBT techniques, there were still questions about data privacy, true effectiveness, you know.
It raises that fundamental question.
Hmm.
What's the responsibility when AI steps into such deeply human, sensitive
Oh,
roles?
exactly. What duty of care do developers have?
So all these examples, Cambridge Analytica, HireVue, the bias studies, the therapy bots, they
Yeah.
really paint a picture of why lawmakers felt they had to step in.
Absolutely. The pressure for some kind of regulatory framework was definitely building.
Let's trace that path then. GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, arrived in 2018. How important was that as a first step?
Oh, GDPR was foundational. You can almost see it as setting the stage. It established really strict rules for personal data across the EU.
Like consent?
Explicit consent, yes. Plus things like the right to be forgotten, data breach notifications, and potentially huge fines for non-compliance. It really signaled the EU was serious about digital privacy.
And it had a ripple effect globally, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It basically became the gold standard, influencing data protection laws all over the world. It showed there's a growing international appetite for these kinds of rules.
Okay, so GDPR focused on data privacy. Then, in 2021, we got the first draft of the EU AI Act itself. What was the core idea there?
That 2021 draft was genuinely groundbreaking. The first real attempt anywhere to create a comprehensive law specifically for AI.
And the main approach was?
Risk-based. That was the central concept. Classifying AI systems based on the level of risk they pose.
The pyramid idea.
Exactly. Prohibited at the top, then high risk, limited risk, and minimal risk at the bottom. And it aimed squarely at high-stakes areas like employment, credit scoring, education, policing, places where AI could really impact people's lives.
And then predictably came the negotiations. 2022, 2023 must have been intense.
Oh, for sure. Lots of back and forth between the EU institutions, the Commission, Council, Parliament. They were hashing out the really tricky bits.
Like what?
Things like biometric surveillance, how much should be allowed, if any, how to handle predictive policing, and crucially, how to deal with these massive, powerful foundation models like GPT-4 that were suddenly advancing so rapidly.
Lots of lobbying, too, I imagine.
Definitely. Industry groups, civil rights organizations, academics, everyone weighed in. The core debate was really about finding that balance. How do you foster AI innovation without sacrificing fundamental rights and safety?
A classic regulatory challenge. Which brings us to March 2024 and the final approval. The first binding global law on AI. Quite a moment.
A landmark, really.
So let's unpack the act itself. You mentioned the risk pyramid. How does that structure work in the final version?
It's still the core structure, a layered approach. It starts with stuff that's just flat out banned. Then strict rules for the high-risk systems. Then transparency rules for others. And finally, a lighter touch for minimal risk AI.
Okay, let's start at the top. Article 5, what's completely prohibited? What's on the no-go list?
Article 5 bans AI systems considered just too dangerous or harmful to fundamental rights.
Like?
Okay, so AI designed to manipulate people subliminally without them realizing it.
Right.
AI that exploits vulnerabilities targeting kids or people with disabilities in harmful ways. Social scoring by governments, like ranking citizens based on behavior, that's out.
That sounds pretty crucial for democracy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And importantly, most uses of real-time remote biometric identification, like facial recognition, in public spaces by law enforcement. There are very narrow exceptions for serious crimes, but the general rule is no.
So using facial recognition to scan crowds generally isn't allowed.
Not in real time for identification purposes, no. The goal is protecting privacy, dignity, non-discrimination. So things like emotion detection systems in shops to target ads, or schools monitoring student mental states without consent, those would likely fall foul of this.
Got it. So that's the banned category. What about the next level down? High-risk AI under Article 6 and Annex 3.
This is where a lot of current AI applications will fall and where the rules get really strict.
What kind of systems are we talking about?
Think about areas with major life consequences. So AI used in hiring resume filtering, those video interview analysis tools like Retorio or HireVue we mentioned.
Okay.
AI in education, like automated exam proctoring or scoring. AI in finance for credit scoring or loan applications.
Makes sense.
Healthcare AI for diagnostics or treatment recommendations. Law enforcement AI like predictive policing tools or evidence assessment. And AI controlling critical infrastructure, power grids, transport networks, water supply.
So pretty crucial stuff. What are the requirements for these high-risk systems?
They're significant. Companies need robust risk management systems. They need detailed technical documentation, basically, proof of how it works and that it's safe. Crucially, there must be human oversight.
Meaning a human has to be in the loop.
Yes, The AI can't make critical decisions completely autonomously.
Mm.
A human needs to be able to intervene and override, and these systems need rigorous testing for accuracy, robustness against bias, and cybersecurity.
So permitted, but with lots of checks and balances.
Exactly. High stakes demand high standards.
Now, transparency seems like a big theme running through this. What does Article 52 say about that?
Yeah, transparency is key. Article 52 basically says people have a right to know when they're dealing with AI in certain situations.
Like chatbots.
Yep. If you're interacting with a chatbot, it needs to disclose that it's an AI, not a person. Same if your biometric data is being processed, say, by an emotion recognition system, you need to be told.
And deepfakes.
That's a big one, too. Content generated or manipulated by AI, like deepfake videos or audio, generally needs to be labeled as artificial.
So you know what you're looking at isn't real.
Exactly. The idea is to prevent deception and manipulation, build trust.
Yeah.
So, an AI giving financial advice, must say it's AI, an AI-generated news report should be labeled.
That feels like a really necessary measure these days. Okay, finally, the bottom of the pyramid. Article 69 and the light touch zone. What falls here?
This covers AI considered minimal or no risk. So lots of everyday tools.
Like my spam filter.
Exactly. Spam filters, basic workflow tools, maybe inventory management systems, simple recommendation engines in e-commerce or streaming services.
Netflix recommendations.
Probably, yeah. Things that don't really have a direct, significant impact on your fundamental rights or safety.
Yeah.
There aren't strict legal obligations like for high-risk AI.
So developers can just do whatever they want.
Not quite. The expectation is they'll still follow voluntary codes of conduct, industry best practices, think ethically about design, monitor for unexpected problems, but it's not legally mandated in the same way.
Okay, so it's a proportionate system. High risk, high regulation, low risk, low regulation.
That's the core idea.
Now, understanding the law is one thing, but seeing how it applies. That applied AI risk classification study from 2023 sounds really useful.
It was. They took, 106 real enterprise AI systems and tried to classify them using the ACTS framework.
And what did they find? Was it clear-cut?
Not always. That was the interesting part. About 18% were clearly high risk. 42% seemed clearly low risk. But a full 40% landed in an unclear category.
40% unclear. That's a lot.
It is. It really shows how complex applying these rules can be in practice. There's ambiguity.
Where did the uncertainty mostly pop up?
Often in those areas we already talked about as potentially high-risk critical infrastructure, employment, law enforcement, finance. It suggests that the legal definitions, while helpful, don't always map perfectly onto the messy reality of specific AI tools.
Like figuring out edge cases.
Exactly. Or determining if a system's impact quite fits a specific high-risk category listed in Annex 3. It highlights the interpretation challenges businesses will face.
The study has specific examples too, right? Like Retorio, the video interview tool. How did that land?
Retorio was classified as high risk. It fits squarely into Annex 3, PUE, AI used for recruitment or selection.
And the reasoning.
Well, the risks are pretty clear. Potential for bias baked into the algorithm, right? Reinforcing existing inequalities. Doubts about whether AI can really judge personality from a video accurately feels a bit like pseudoscience sometimes.
Yeah.
And the lack of transparency for candidates. If you get rejected, you often have no idea why. The study asks, how comfortable are you being judged on your smile by an algorithm?
Not very. Okay, what about voice biometrics for bank authentication?
Also high risk. That falls under Annex 3.1a, biometric identification.
Risks there being?
Security and privacy, mainly. Your voice print is unique biometric data. What if it's stolen? How secure is it? Are people fully aware their voice is being used like a password?
And unlike a password, you can't easily change your voice.
Precisely. Plus, potential bias issues. Does it work equally well for everyone? Different accents, speech impediments? And who actually owns that voice data? It raises big questions.
Definitely. Now, Hawk.ai, the fraud detection system, that was high risk or unclear. Why the ambiguity?
Okay, so Hawk.ai monitors transactions for fraud, like money laundering. The ambiguity comes down to whether it counts as AI used for law enforcement purposes. If yes, it's clearly high risk under Annex 3 Extusa K. If it's just an internal bank tool, maybe not.
Okay.
The ethical concerns are there regardless, though. False positives flagging legitimate transactions can cause huge problems for people.
Yeah, getting your account frozen.
Right. And again, transparency.
Yeah.
Why was my transaction flagged? Can I appeal it easily? If an AI basically accuses you of suspicious activity, what recourse do you have?
That really underlines the complexity. Let's flip to the other end. ScoutBee, the supplier discovery tool. Low risk.
Yes. Classified as low risk. Scalpy helps businesses find suppliers using public data. It doesn't process personal or biometric data, and it doesn't directly impact individuals' rights or access to essential services.
So it's B2B, internal decision making.
Pretty much, it's optimizing a business process, not making life-altering decisions about people. So, under the Act, it's considered low risk.
And Auto, the logistics AI for the German retailer, also low risk.
Same reasoning, essentially. Auto predicts customer demand to manage inventory. Again, no biometric or sensitive personal data involved in the core function, no direct impact on fundamental rights like employment, finance, healthcare.
It might influence what products I see.
It might, yeah. And there may be transparency considerations there, but it's not seen as posing the kind of high-stakes risk the Act is primarily focused on regulating strictly. It's optimizing logistics, not deciding if you get a loan.
Okay, these examples really help make the risk levels more concrete. It's definitely not black and white. So that's the law. But how are companies actually trying to do AI ethics on the ground? Are they putting processes in place?
Yeah, it seems like many of the big players are. You see frameworks emerging. Microsoft has its responsible AI standard, for example.
What does that involve?
It's quite structured. Things like clearly defining the AI's intended use, identifying who might be impacted, assigning accountability, doing risk assessments, testing, putting in safeguards like opt-outs or warnings, and documenting everything.
Sounds comprehensive.
It is on paper.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge, of course, is making sure it's applied consistently across huge organizations, translating principles into actual engineering practices.
Right. What about Google and DeepMind?
They also have established ethics review processes, especially for their more powerful models. They use things called model cards, documents outlining use cases, limitations, potential harms, fairness assessments.
Assessing risks beforehand.
Yes. Looking at benefits versus harms, misuse potential. They also do red teaming, trying to break the system or find vulnerabilities, and often require sign-off from internal ethics boards before major deployments.
So it seems like a serious effort, at least in some quarters, a recognition that trust is crucial.
Definitely. It's not just about ticking legal boxes, but about building systems people can actually rely on and feel comfortable with. Long-term viability depends on it.
So thinking about our listeners now, maybe someone who sent in these sources, how can they start applying this kind of thinking to the AI they encounter?
That's a great takeaway point. You can start asking those critical questions yourself.
Like,
Well, does this AI use my personal data, my biometric data? Is it making decisions that could really affect me, jobs, loans, healthcare, education, legal matters?
assessing the potential impact.
Exactly. What are the risks if it goes wrong? Or if it's biased? Think about some of the examples mentioned in the sources: Character.ai, Babylon Health, Snapchat's My AI, predictive policing, grade scope for grading.
Try to mentally classify them.
Yeah, run them through that risk framework we discussed. Is it likely high risk, low risk? Why? Who benefits? Who might be harmed? Is it transparent? Can I appeal a decision it makes?
It's about cultivating that critical awareness, isn't it? Asking that, wait, is this okay? Question we started with.
Precisely. And hopefully, understanding the EU AI Act,
Yeah.
even just the basics we've covered, gives everyone a better toolkit for doing that analysis. You can see the logic behind the regulations now.
So wrapping things up, this deep dive really shows the EU AI Act is, well, it's a major attempt to get ahead of the curve, driven by real concerns about AI's impact.
Definitely a proactive effort to align AI with European values.
And that risk-based approach, the bans, the strict rules for high-risk stuff, the focus on transparency, it provides a potential blueprint, doesn't it?
It does. A framework for accountability. And it's good to see companies starting to build their own internal ethics processes, too, moving beyond just compliance.
Hopefully this has given everyone listening a clearer picture of this landmark legislation and what it might mean.
Yeah, a solid foundation, hopefully.
So maybe one final thought to leave everyone with. Now that we've seen how Europe is tackling AI regulation, what responsibility do we all have, individuals, companies, to think about these ethical issues proactively, especially in places where laws like the EU AI Act might not exist yet?
That's the big question, isn't it? Does ethics wait for regulation?
Something to ponder. We definitely encourage you to keep digging into the resources you shared, explore the parts that sparked your interest. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.